Hey, and welcome back. This is Bible 365 with Kathy Carter, and today is day 46. We are going through Numbers 7, 1 through 89. So just giving that brief introduction that I always give when I start the videos is I'm using the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online under the 1 Year Chronological Bible online.com, or the 1 Year Chronological Bible book, the actual Bible, which is in the NIV, the NLT, and the New King James, NKJV. So if you want to do any of those versions, if you want to purchase the book and to read along, that is amazing as well. It's actually easier, but it's completely optional. It's totally up to you. As a matter of fact, if I know it's been a while since I have shown this, but if you wanted to, just so you know, this is exactly what it looks like when you do your reading. So today is this day, and so it actually has everything that we would be reading along with, and then it moves on. So it's every day you would know what day you were on, as long as you are sticking with the plan. So, and if you're not, and if you need to go a little bit slower, that's okay too. And then obviously that date would be a little bit different, but it would still go in the same exact chronological order, and you wouldn't have to search through it in your own Bible. But it's completely up to you whether you want to put out the money or you just want to read it in your own Bible using the reading plan. It just means you need a lot of bookmarks. So when I did it the first time, I used the reading plan, and sometimes we're in like 6 books. So it keeps you on your toes. Try to do everything you need. But so today we have finished the book of Exodus. But we are not done with Moses. And so we're going to be sticking a lot with Moses and the Israelites who came out of Egypt. And so if you just want to do a really brief reminder, you can go back if you want to do a heavier reminder if you forgot some of the things that you read. But Moses and Aaron are brothers, and they were both born in Egypt in slavery. So in this time of slavery, after the time of Joseph, where they still lived in the land of Gershon, which was in the area of Egypt, and they lived under Pharaoh. And so slowly over time, the people grew, and they grew so big, and it had been so long since Joseph was alive that Pharaoh, instead of working with the Israelite people, he actually just oppressed them, and they became slaves in the land of Egypt, and they were slaves for hundreds of years until Moses was born, and God used Moses to free his people from bondage. And now he wants them to remember this through all time. He wants to remember them before anything else happens. He wants them to consistently remember. So he says at this point, he wants them to have a festival every single year, remembering the Passover, how he killed the firstborn son of the Egyptians, but he saved all of the sons of the Israelites, and then he brought them all up out of Egypt. They are currently on Mount Sinai, and they have built God's home among them, the Tabernacle, the tent of meeting, where Moses and Aaron and his sons will be meeting with God and speaking with him. And so now we are going to get offerings. And so the temple has been made. And it says, so if, as a matter of fact, in the first verse, it says, so if we go to verse 1, it says, so I highlight those words myself. They're not like in all caps or anything. When Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, he anointed and consecrated it. Remember, so anointing, he pours oil on things. So he anoints them, he makes them holy, and consecrates them, makes them holy, right? So these are making this area set apart and holy for God. So when Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, he anointed and consecrated it and all its furnishings. He also anointed and consecrated the altar and all its utensils. Then, so when he did this, then the leaders of Israel, the heads of families who were the tribal leaders in charge of those who were counted, made offerings. And I wanted to point out that because what we're going to see is, and I had talked about this a little bit, the hierarchy in and among these people. So the heads of these families, so every one of the 12 tribes of Israel has a head above that tribe, right? So the first one that we start with is Judah. And so Judah has one person that is the head of all of Judah, right? So how Moses is the head of all the Israelites, right? So God speaks to Moses, and then Moses comes down and he speaks to the heads of the tribes, and then they kind of take it out amongst all of their own people, right? The tribal people, or Moses would come down and he would sort of speak to everybody. So it depends who he'd be speaking to at the time, but there's a hierarchy there. So there is a head of the tribe, because if you'll remember, yesterday I think I talked about it. Every person that was counted, right? So every person that gave an offering, if you'll remember this, was a man above the age of 20. And so they gave an offering, and those people counted 603,000, I think 550, something like that. So there were more than 603,000 of them. And so the likelihood is there were at least the same amount of women and probably a similar amount of children. And so there was probably at least a million, if not up to 2 million people that they were all traveling with at the time. And so it was broken up into 12 tribes, and there was one leader for every tribe, right? So one person would at this point take the offerings to the temple. And so I bring this up because I think the hierarchy is important. It is establishing a foundation for the people of Israel. It is establishing a lordship, a headship, right? Who people should be listening to, who people should be going to, right? And so thinking of all those things, and even, and I want to keep going, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, because the book is significantly longer. And I don't just mean the book of Numbers, I mean the Bible itself. But it makes me curious as to what the way we worship and the way that we as Christians sort of live in community with each other, is it supposed to look like what the Israelite community looked like? Or is it supposed to be different? Are we supposed to look similar but different to the Israelite community and how God established that? And so it's something that I want to keep in my head as we continue to move on in the Bible. So I don't want to forget what they look like, and I want to make a big deal about what they look like. So being very clear that they had a hierarchy, they had people in charge, they had heads of military, they had heads of, the priesthood. Remember, the Levites were the priests. And so they were people who didn't actually give an offering because they accepted the offerings. And so we're going to see a little bit of that as well. So in verse 6, reading verse 6 to you, it says, so Moses took the carts and oxen and gave them to the Levites, which is the people group that I just brought up. So if you guys remember the 12 tribes of Israel, they were Jacob's 12 sons. This is another thing that's fascinating to me. So remember, there's in the neighborhood of 400 years of when Joseph brought all the tribes of Israel to, because Joseph is one of them. So one of the sons of Jacob. So if you remember, he brought all of the sons of Jacob. There were 70 at that time, so it was so small. 70 people in their family that they brought to the land of Egypt, and they left the land of Canaan to go live there, and God gave them the okay to do that. And now they have multiplied so much, but it has been hundreds of years, and yet these people still know actually what tribe that they're in, which is another thing that I find super fascinating. If anyone knows me, they know that a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point, I did my DNA. I did 23andMe, and I found out that I was Irish, and mostly Irish, like 85% or something like that. But I grew up actually having no idea what I was. We didn't even celebrate St. Patrick's Day, which is probably really funny. But I had no idea certainly what tribe I came from. I didn't know. That wasn't something that we as a family followed, or we weren't invested in it. We didn't keep to any traditions of any of our prior generations before us. So we had been in the United States for many, many generations, and we just didn't remember what it looked like before we got here, or what my people looked like before I got here. So for me to know that several hundred years later, they still knew their tribes, meant that they had an identity in their tribes that I actually don't have or understand. So their identity was based in who they were and what tribe they belonged to, because they remembered that and they taught their children that. And so a lot of the times they probably married into that, because otherwise you wouldn't know what tribe you were a part of. And so that there was something that kept their tribes, I want to say clean in a way, but kept their tribe, them knowing who their tribes were. And by the time they came here, it wasn't like their tribes were so, well, my grandfather is a son of Dan, but my grandmother is a daughter of Benjamin, and her parents were daughters of Levi and Issachar, right? Like, so that's, they seem to be cleaner than that. They seem to be a little more contained than that. So I find that fascinating because I don't think we do that anymore. And honestly, I don't know if now, like, I think that there's something to be said about us mixing tribes and us um, being in community with people that are different than us and the benefits that come from that. And even not necessarily holding so hard onto our own ancestral traditions and loving and honoring ours and theirs, right? So I think there's some beauty to that. But in here, they kept to their tribes. And again, I'm going to say that there was probably a purpose. God probably orchestrated or kept that way for a reason. So they by tribe gave offerings to the head. So one of the things that I noted here, it says that they gave them to the Levites, and then it moves on to say he gave 2 carts and 4 oxen to the Gershonites as their work required, and he gave 4 carts and 8 oxen to the Merarites as their work required. They were all under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron. So remember, Aaron's son was in charge of sort of this whole Levitical area because Aaron and his 2 sons were considered priests. They were anointed and consecrated as priests throughout their generations. Ithamar, son of Aaron, the priest. But Moses did not give any to the Kohathites because they were to carry on their shoulders the holy things for which they were responsible. And I bring these up because these 3 names, Merari, Kohath, and Gershon, these 3 names were the sons of Levi, actual Levi. So if we go back to Genesis 46:11, it states, and it's just really just a basic genealogy. So 46:11 right here just states the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And then they have the sons of Judah. So they move on from there. But so we know that they were the sons. And so again, not only does this family know that they were the sons of Levi, but they also know what sons of Levi they were. So they were, once they were in the Levite family, they were broken up into 3 different son groups, and each one of them had a role. So each one of them were supposed to do certain things in and around the tabernacle and tent of meetings. So in verse 9, it says, the Kohathites, Moses didn't give any to the Kohathites because they were to carry on their shoulders the holy things for which they were responsible. So their job is to carry the holy things. That's what they are responsible for. Not the other 2 sets. The other 2 sets they do different things. All right. Now, this next big section is all extremely repetitive. I hope you read it. And I know, I'm assuming by the 3rd or 4th time, you can see that it exactly, identically repeated itself. But I hope you kept reading it because I think there's some benefit to that and to understanding that it exactly, identically repeats itself. So all 12 tribes gave the same exact things. So here we go. This is the thing I find interesting. It was 1 tribe at a time. So they did it 1 day at a time, 1 tribe at a time. The first tribe is Judah. I'm completely curious, and I'm sure maybe there's a reason. Maybe I don't know the reason at this point. Maybe it hasn't been open to me. But these sons were all in different order. This was not their birth order. Their birth order were Reuben and Simeon, I think, were first, and then maybe Levi, then Judah, right? Because if you remember, these are the sons of Rebecca was the love daughter. These are the sons of Leah, it was his first wife, which was unfortunately the unloved wife by Jacob, because Jacob had 12 sons. And then what we see is number 7 is Ephraim. That one's not even a son, technically. That one's not a son of Jacob. But if you recall, so Levi isn't in here. Levi is now the Levites. They're the ones that are accepting the sacrifices and they're accepting all the offerings. And Joseph isn't in here. Joseph's 2 sons are in here. And if you remember, Jacob adopted those 2 sons. And then those 2 sons are the heads of 2 of the tribes. So number 7 is Ephraim and number 8 is Manasseh. And so that's where they fit in. Now, again, this is out of order. The last son is Benjamin, but Benjamin in here is the 9th in order. So I'm not 100% sure. He doesn't name why the order is done in which the way it is done. Maybe we'll find out later, but I know as of right now, we don't know why. But what we do know is that they gave four different offerings. Okay, so everything came down to four different offerings. One is a grain offering. So they have these silver pots and they're filled with silver basins. They're filled with certain things, right? So they give a grain offering, they give a burnt offering, they give a sin offering, and they give a fellowship offering. Every tribe, from the richest to the poorest, from the biggest to the smallest, gives the same identical exact offering, and they all give the same things, and they are all given to the Levites, and they are all dedicated to the Lord. So they are preparing all of this for the Israelite people. So the Israelite people, the tribes are again treated equally, they are offered equally. Now it's not always going to be the case, but that is definitely the case right now, because he just finished the tabernacle and now they're dedicating everything to the tabernacle. So he's bringing them together as a people, right? These Israelites, where, I mean, I can't even think of what it would be like to be a part of a million people. And you know what the truth of the matter is we are a part of a million people. So the truth of the matter is as a Christian here, I am a sister of a Christian over in China. She is my family, right? Or a brother over in China, whatever, he, she. I have family over in China. They are a part of me. I have this opportunity to give and be a part of that family in China, right? So we are sisters and siblings, but it's again, I think I talked a little bit yesterday, like where it's intangible. I can't necessarily feel that that's the case. Where here they all came together, right? They were all in this, and they all lived in the same area. They all lived in essentially the same way, right? They're tent community kind of at this point. They're all going to the same tabernacle, honoring the same God. And so there's just something where he has just wholly created this tight knit community where they all know that they share things together, right? They are unified in God, and they are unified in their giving. They are unified in their serving. So there's a unification as a people group that I'm sad to say I feel like I'm missing it. I feel like and I remember years ago um, believing that I had better connections with people that weren't of the house of faith than that were of the house of faith, that I felt judged by people of the house of faith. Whereas outside of the house of the faith, there really was no judgment. They didn't really pick on me or feel like I needed to look a certain way or act a certain way. And many years ago, I had like hot pink hair or purple hair all the time, and so there's some looks and judgment and things there. And so I just remember feeling more comfortable outside of my community of believers. And I don't think that's God's plan for us. I think when he shows this image here where they were very literal, I think there's some of that for us now. I think there's a way in which we should be living that we recognize that we really are in a family and we really are related. And even though we have differences in the way that we look, in the language, maybe necessarily that we speak, Jesus still asks us, Jesus through God, right, still asks us to do the same things, to honor him in the same way, to love our fellow. But they do a fellowship offering. So they're being, just to break it down in the most basic things, they're being fellows with each other. They're offering things so they can be in fellowship with each other, so they can be fellows with each other, so they can recognize that each other is part of the community. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but I think that there are ways in which I need to improve my actual relationship with people who follow the same God that I follow. I think that's what he wants from us. I think he would honor that and he would bless that. And I think I need maybe to have less of a barrier up against those people that are slightly different from me, whether it's financially or educationally, or again, language and color is unfortunately an easy one. So I think I need to really maybe grow more in that area, in loving more of my brothers and sisters in the same community, because recognizing that we are in the same community, right? So we're fellowshipping with each other. And so it's just really convicting to me as I listen to it and as I see how much he's brought that community together. All right, so 12 tribes do that. And remember that we've got some of those extra tribes, which makes 12 tribes. So 12 tribes do that. And then at the end, in verse 84, so coming right back to the end of this, says, these were the offerings of the Israelite leaders for the dedication of the altar when it was anointed. So they list all of the things that were offered. So they're dedicating the altar, which is where God is going to come down. And then in verse 89, it says, when Moses, so after this is all over, Moses enters the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord. He heard the voice speaking to him from between the two cherubim above the atonement cover on the altar of the covenant law. In this way, the Lord spoke to him. So Moses had the honor and the privilege of being in this tent and having the Lord audibly speak to him and tell him all these things. And I'm saying this because what he says and the things in which he writes down in this book are things that he audibly heard God of the universe saying to him. That is important. That is important for me as someone who is many, many, many generations away from Moses, and I follow Christ. That is a really important thing for me to understand, that what he says is God's word. It is holy and it is important, and he got to hear him speak it, and therefore he wrote it down. And then to look at the memory of, again, remember going back a few chapters, how much he remembered everything that he had to do to make the tabernacle, right? And then he made it exact and precise. And now he's going to do that with everything else. And so he's going to directly speak to God. God's going to speak to him, and then he's going to pass it on. And this is always one of those things I wonder too, is this where he heard the story of Genesis, right? Is this where God revealed to him everything that happened before? And so he wrote that down before, and he gave that to us. All right, I'm ending today on that. That is Numbers 1 through 89. If you didn't read it, go back, read it, see what they offered, see how much they gave up in order just to dedicate this temple. Remember how much they had already given up of their stuff to just build this temple. And now they gave up more just to dedicate it, right? Just to hear God speak to Moses. So they know what God asks them to do every day of their lives. Hopefully they will honor it. We'll see what happens. So tomorrow we will be moving on in Numbers. But if you guys like this, I want you to actually hit the like button. I want you to share it, subscribe to it. Come back and listen again. I always want you to read before you come back and listen. Reading is key. For those of you who aren't reading and just listening, whoever that may be, I am so honored and grateful that you're actually listening. I'm super excited about that. And after that, I want you to read it, right? Because I want God to work inside your hearts and your minds so he can show you what you need to see in his word, right? Now you hear what I hear, what God says to me in his word. I want to see what you have to say in God's word and what he says to you, especially if this is the first time you're reading it. So good luck in your reading. Moving on to Numbers. Remember, we're in the book of Numbers now. And I will see you next time. Keep reading, guys.